The Theater History Podcast is supported by HowlRound, a Knowledge Commons by and for the theater community. It's available on iTunes and howlround.com.
Nobody, sung by Bert Williams. When life seems full of clouds and rain, and I'm full of nothing and pain, who soothes my thumping, bumping brain? Nobody. When winter comes with snow and sleet.
Hi, and welcome to the Theater History Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Leager. Today we're talking with actor and playwright Jeremy Morris, who's developing a new play based on the life of the African-American vaudeville star Bert Williams. It's called The Top of Bravery, and it's running now through February 5th at the Richmond Triangle Players in Richmond, Virginia. It's a co-production of Quill Theater, African-American Repertory Theater of Virginia, and the Conciliation Project. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Who was Bert Williams, and why is he so significant?
Well, Bert, first and foremost, his name, Egbert Austin Williams, and it's a fun little fact that we throw into the play, that I wrote into the play, that Williams is not his actual last name. His father took on another surname, kind of a more American surname, once they arrived from the Bahamas. So he gets to the Bahamas and they take on the surname Williams, kind of in order to fit in a little bit. But Egbert Austin Williams was a natural performer. He spoke about how it just was something that he always felt connected to, was speaking to people, telling stories to people, making people laugh. It was something that just came out of him naturally. And so he just sought out ways to be in a position where he could be doing that, and it led him to performing outside of medicine shows, those traveling snake oil salesman type things where people would be selling these elixirs and products and things like that. He'd be the one that would be bringing the crowd over before the salesman would make their pitch, or there would be a show in the little tent before that pitch would happen. And so he would bring people in and entertain them and make them really curious about what they were getting ready to see. So he started out doing all of that, which is what led him to meeting his best friend, George Walker, who would become his best and most significant collaborator for both of their careers.
And he goes on to achieve a level of stardom that I think was almost unheard of for an African-American performer at the time.
It was unheard of for any performer at the time, really. There weren't a whole lot of international stars in that time period, especially not with minstrel shows. Like, you're talking about a very specific kind of audience, an American audience, no doubt. It was definitely the main pastime. It's like going to the movies nowadays or reality TV nowadays. It was just that popular. If you were going out for entertainment, you were more than likely going to be going to a minstrel show. So there weren't a whole lot of people who were invited to London to go and do that. So eventually him becoming an international star was something that even was, not common for any performer at this time period. It was something that was a point of pride for all involved, especially the fact that they were able to do it as an all black vaudeville company, of whom there were not very many at that time period either. So for them to have been who they were when they were, you're talking about near impossible.
And you mentioned he had a company. You mentioned George Walker already. There's two very intriguing female figures as well, Lottie Thompson and Ada Overton Walker.
Right. Those two women would go on to become their wives, but in their own right, they were entertainers of the top order, the highest order. Lottie ends up becoming the first to leave show business, essentially to support Bert, to be there for the nieces after her sister passes away in 1913. They take on their three nieces and they never have children of their own, but these are pretty much their children until the end of both of their lives. But she leaves show business for a while to kind of be with Bert. But before that, she was quite the storyteller. They talk about how she was quite the entertainer herself. She got some really good reviews in some of the shows that they collaborated on. Ada Overton Walker, or she starts out as Ada Reed Overton before she marries George Walker, was just the epitome of a graceful, beautiful, inventive dancer. Like her accolades are numerous, are just like, I mean, if you go digging for quotes about what it was like to watch her dance, there don't seem to be enough otherworldly terms to describe how talented she was, which is what drew George Walker, among other things, of course, but what drew George Walker to her. And they recognized from the first moment that they worked with her that they would not get much further than they possibly could. You know, on their own merits, they were awesome. But with her, they knew for a fact that would just push it over the edge. And so she ends up choreographing all of their dances pretty much for the collaborative shows they do as the Williams and Walker Company. She's a genius. They called her the Queen of the Cakewalk. So before these women were just, you know, they were towers of their own in their own right. So I try to nail that down in the piece, that it's not these two women needing these two men to bolster them to superstardom. They were already amazing presences on the stage before, but it just, everybody became elevated after that. All four of them, George Walker, Bert Williams, Ada Overton, and Lottie, they were just like, they were all just completely out of this world with like what was going on, what they faced up into that point. And I mean, that goes to say for all the other people that collaborated with them. Paul Laurence Dunbar was the one who wrote some of their scripts, some of the music. Will Marion Cook was a genius musician at that time. He was internationally recognized. So all of these people kind of served one another and made each other better. But for there to have been a collective like this of people, at that time was just, you know, something that people just wouldn't usually guess these days. And it's so important to be able to highlight that kind of thing, so that people recognize that it was always this wonderful innovation that was coming out of people of color, especially when the stakes were so high, like under threat of death. These people pushed the boundaries, pushed the envelope, defied an entire society that told them that they weren't worth as much as a white person. It's really a marvel to be able to bring them to life, and especially those four. We call them the Mount Rushmore of the performing arts and musical theater world of that time period.
That's a wonderful analogy. Could you tell us a little bit more about the act? There's a number of sort of individual numbers. You talk a little bit about Williams's sometimes complicated relationship with some of his hit songs, but then there are also longer pieces such as In Dahomey, which is one of their more famous productions.
Right. Sorry, what's the question exactly?
Oh, sorry. Could you tell us, what was it like to see Williams and Walker? What would they perform? What might you expect to see if you went to one of their performances?
Okay, well, and that's a really hard thing you can read it through reviews, but in any case that you're dealing with the news of the day, like newspapers, magazine articles, reviews, and everything like that, they were directly interviewed a few times. Among the four of them, they had several interviews that you can find their own words, which is I drew very much from their own words for telling their story. When you went to a Williams and Walker show, you had all these people, first and foremost, like a stage full of black folks. So this was something that wasn't, of course, was not a very common thing at all. They employed all writers of color, all dancers of color, all actors of color, singers of color. You would just see every shade, every form of person of color, just a beautiful spectrum of peoples of African descent all over the stage. And then they would come out and they would just make the whole house laugh, like gut-busting laugh. They speak about in the reviews, and some of the reviews where it's just the whole audience, regardless of how mixed the crowd was. Sometimes they were performing at past capacity crowds of people who were not opposed to standing in the aisles or outside of the aisles or right in the back of the theater or what have you. They had segregated seating for most of their performances, in which they would call the gallery seating. Of course, they would specifically put all the people of color up there, but sometimes they would run out of room up there, and they would have people of color intermixed with the white people in the regular admission seating, just because they didn't want to turn money away. Now, that's some theaters that wouldn't want to turn the money away, but there are other theaters that were glad to turn people of color away based off of those segregation laws. But they were just talking about how everybody who went to a Williams and Walker show was laughing their tails off, and just like didn't really matter at certain points where who was in the room or who you were sitting next to. In certain cases, they were able to bring the whole room together, no matter what nationality those people were. But also, the really interesting thing was that they would have to utilize these sorts of concepts and these certain buzzwords like racial epithets and stuff like that. Like, the songs were still classified as coon songs, as they called them. Very, very popular art form at that time, just making fun of black people, and this completely grotesque misperception of black people of the time, born out of the stereotypes of Uncle Tom's Cabin. They had to do those songs, but the way that they wrote them was always something kind of a coded message to the black people who would hear them. There's a song called "Ever Darky is a King" that we use in the play. It's every bit that kind of coded language where it's like, we are speaking directly to our people. This is only for us. The people are hearing the word darky, and they're seeing all these black people dancing up on the stage. If anybody was on the street, a person of color on the street would have told a white person, "Ever darky is a king," they'd have probably met some really, really awful situations. They probably would have been hurt or killed. You know, asserting somebody's humanity or asserting their self-worth in such a way was just not something that people of color were able to outright do without any sort of consequences. But those people standing up on that stage sang it to a majority white audience, and they were with them. So it's like it's serving both purposes. They're moving toward, but then also past, the restrictions that were put into the imaginations of the people that thought that people of color were less than. They're simultaneously fulfilling the so-called or desired expectations of white audiences, while also affirming and reaffirming to their colored audience that we see you and we are not buying into what they've tried to label us. And so it was twofold. There were certain people that couldn't see that, through the songs, through the offensive nature of those songs. Like songs like "All Coons Look Alike to Me." We talk about how that song was a huge hit. Millions and millions of records were sold of a song called "All Coons Look Alike to Me." The man who wrote it went to his grave regretting writing it. So it's like that success comes at a cost. Even when they were pushing the conversation forward, even when they were innovating and reinventing and, and recreating the self-worth and the self-image of people of color in this country, they were still paying a heavy price having to use that art form in the way in which they did. So you're seeing all sorts of different things, all sorts of different, like, just genre pushing, genre bolstering artistry at a Williams and Walker show. And it only got better as time went on, but In Dahomey was definitely their magnum opus. It took them all over the world.
I was about to say, you do a wonderful job showing how this success does have its sort of dark flip side. It does have a cost. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I think many listeners will find particularly striking is learning that Bert Williams performed in blackface.
Mm-hmm. And it's a trying thing. That whole concept of the mask. To say, and W.E.B. Du Bois, he puts it, speaks about the dual consciousness. Is actually a really wonderful poem for the listeners out there who want to kind of delve into the concept a little bit more. Paul Laurence Dunbar, someone I mentioned a little earlier, prolific writer, poet, songwriter, wrote In Dahomey with Will Marion Cook, and he has a poem called "We Wear the Mask," and it is about that very situation. with the mask on, there were certain allowances that were made for performers of color, because of the fact that it's essentially as though the mask was like a barrier. It was essentially like, this is the lie that is being told to make white people more comfortable. They weren't comfortable about those certain, people who would make radical statements, or radical for that day. I don't consider it radical. It's just truth. That every black person, just like every white person, has as much a stake in this country as anybody else. Regular on the street couldn't just say that to anybody. If you wear it through the mask, if you're clowning it, if you're singing it, if you're dancing behind it, for some reason that made white people a little bit more comfortable. It made it palatable. And so in the back of their minds, they're getting this message that's being given to them. They're hearing it, but on the surface of it, they don't necessarily have to recognize it as truth because it is told by someone who is dressed up as a lie. So it's just like that whole concept of dual consciousness that W.B. Du Bois talks about. How do you show your true face to the world? They are already afraid of your real face. They already think that they know everything about you that they need to know, and they fear those lies that were told about you. So when you put that mask on, when you smile through it, when you laugh about it, that face that is the lie, that is the cover of what is truly in the soul of a person who is trying their best to hold on to their own identity, who is trying to affirm themselves and their existence in the world as being equal to the other people who have told them that they're not. That's what gets them through. That's what carries them over. If you tell it in a joke, they can, they latch on to the fun part of the joke, but that joke, every single joke has a little bit of truth to it, which is what makes it a good joke. So behind that mask, Bert Williams was able to say things and do things that literally nobody else would have probably been able to get away with. And in that, the more times that you pretend to be something that you're not, chances are, they say that you tell a lie enough times, it starts to become the truth to you, to the listener of the lie. That's kind of what kind of a toll it takes on these people. And even later on in the history of minstrelsy, we can see that other black artists who had to wear blackface for one reason or the other became so attached to the face, they had to figure out whether or not it was their face. I think it was Pigmeat Markham, as a matter of fact, that spoke about one time after years and years of performing in blackface, he performed without it and said, it's not the same. I can't get all the way to the place where I was when I had the mask on. It's a different plane of consciousness. It's a different, kind of state of being, because you have to assume that lie. You have to wear it as though it is yours. But after a while that, you start to try to figure out what's really your face. And Bert Williams all over, later on in his career, he speaks about having wanted to take on a dramatic role and not really knowing whether or not he would be able to be successful without blackface. Everybody around him, I can imagine, was telling him, you don't need that anymore. You've been all over the world. Like, what else is it? You are the comedian. The face is not you. But he still went to his grave not having ever taken that step.
Williams's career is so important and so varied, and as we've been discussing, some of the issues that it brings up are so weighty and crucial to understanding the history of African American performance. How do you get this into your play, The Top of Bravery?
It's tricky. It's definitely tricky. Just because there's a feeling, and especially now, I think that there's a whole lot of other people that can kind of really relate to this, of like this uncertain dread, I think, to being in any of these situations that we're describing in this time period. The same throughout the history of this country is true. There have been progressions made. There have been improvements made. People have really, sacrificed. They've fought, bled, died to see that we are in a very, very unique time in the history of this country, to where more people have a voice and more people are able to use that voice. In these times, that ever-present threat, that ever-present resistance to the equality of people is something that pervades the decisions of every person of color. And I'm talking about everyone. I'm not talking about just peoples of African descent. Also, our homosexual brothers and sisters, Muslims these days. There's this ever-present uncertainty of whether or not you are actually safe in the presence of your fellow countrymen around you at any given point. So how do you make that an ever-present fact of, a play, of a piece of art? It's tricky just because, trying to recreate that in any small part is just going to be a little bit tricky. It's just going to be a little, daunting, I think, at first. But that's something that I thought was so important to communicate. And so out of the gate, there are references that I make. There are certain ideas that I invoke that I know for a fact are going to make the audience uncomfortable. And that's just, because we've gone so long without actually really squarely dealing with those things. And so the language that's used for a very particular purpose, the references that I use, the images that I conjure and everything like that with the writing, it's all very, very important and goes into really communicating what it was like for these people, that every moment there could be something else that just kind of surprises you and hits you, knocks you off guard. And so as a result of that, I was hoping that really bringing out the truth of it, not tiptoeing around the ugly fact of what was going on with these people, the words that had to come out of their mouths, on a regular basis, and the words that they were hearing on a regular basis that were either hurled at them or used jokingly or what have you. Trying to put that into the story and weave that all throughout the proceedings and how these people interact with each other on a daily basis, on stage and off, was very important to me. So I think that that's probably the best I could put it into words, how I was able to really kind of find a place for it in the play.
And what about the performance side of it? What is it like to play Bert Williams?
When I did the solo performance at first, there was a woman who was there, and she asked me a question and asked me what was it like to put on blackface. And she didn't stop there. She just went, she started kind of throwing out words to me. So she was saying, did you feel sad? Did you feel angry? Did you feel anxious? Were you frustrated? And I told her, keep going. I can't describe how difficult it is. It's like, and I mean, it's a difference between wearing face paint for, to become a clown, to become an exaggerated version of, kind of a made up imaginary, whimsical, fantastical thing. Or if you're playing an alien, or if you're playing this or you're playing that, makeup goes a long way in kind of changing our imagination or changing our perception of what is human, what is magic, what is, what have you. So all of that goes a very long way with kind of creating and telling a story, especially if you want to get people out of the normal of what they're used to. The regular human face is very, very recognizable. But there's something about assuming, like I said, the lie. It's a very, very ugly circumstance because you're wearing the terrible misperceptions about yourself, the things that are not true about yourself, but everyone who looks at you, just the very fact of who or what you are, how you came into this world, labels you a violent person, labels you a sexually deviant person, labels you lazy, labels you shiftless, labels you unintelligent, labels you built for labor and conquest and nothing else. So all of those different things are what you are essentially putting on yourself, and you are at the same time erasing who it is you are to do it. So the first few times, and I have to give a shout out to Dr. Tanya Pettiford-Wace. The first time I did blackface was in a program called the Uncle Tom's Deconstructed, which explores the same themes but in a very hyper-stylized way. designed for conversation, designed for what she calls conciliation, of course, because reconciliation is suggesting that there was a relationship or togetherness beforehand, whereas conciliation, based on the fact that this country never truly has conciled, meaning it cannot reconcile. And so the Conciliation Project is all about reconciling. It's all about coming together for the first time. Uncle Tom Deconstructed explores those stereotypes and where they came from, how they manifest themselves in the modern day. That first time that I literally watched my face disappear. There's a ritual to it. There's a strategy to it, because you have to be becoming the character. You have to be becoming the minstrel as you're doing it, or else you're not going to be able to separate the two out. And it's so true. So the first time I did it was just painful. It was just scary. It was painful. It was infuriating. So I think that if I had not done that work, I probably would not be able to do this one. So I have to absolutely give her so much thanks and for the guidance that she gave us. So in that, performing with this person, the fact is, had he not done those things, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. Had people like Ira Aldridge, who came before him, long before him, the turn of the 18th century to the 19th century, he was part of the African Company. Those men and women took great strides as well. 100 years before Bert Williams and everybody else, enduring the same things. And that was even in the time that enslavement was still happening. We didn't get rid of slavery until about 60 years after the African Company was around. So those people are the reason that somebody like Bert Williams was able to come along. And then Bert Williams is the reason that somebody that like U.B. Blake was able to come along. And U.B. Blake is the reason that somebody like Paul Robeson was able to come along. And then Paul Robeson was the reason that somebody like Sidney Poitier would be able to come along. And so on and so forth. If those people had not done those things and hadn't experienced exactly what it is I imagine that I experienced, except for the fact that I'm using makeup, he used burnt cork, and I can't imagine what that's like. Like those people making those sacrifices and making those decisions and daring to be as bold as they were and daring to change the conversation surrounding something that was so painful and so ugly and so terrible. I couldn't be doing it in the first place. And so you take it on because it's a responsibility that's been given to you. It's a torch that has been passed. And without recognizing that that's where it all comes from, we can't recognize the gravity of the opportunity that we have to not only tell the stories of our ancestors and tell the stories of our forefathers, the people that created the art form as we know it, to be able to change it and push it forward today. But it's just like, that's the whole purpose. It's the whole reason that I can and will tell that story. And so the actuality of putting that blackface on, while still painful, it is a necessary pain. It's a thing I do proudly. It's a thing that I don't take lightly anytime that I do it. And I hope that I communicate that every time that I do it, that this man was worthy of the honor that he never seemed to get. Because when we look back on blackface minstrelsy these days, it's a point of shame most times. People kind of don't want to deal with it because of the nature of it. So I think that's the best I can do at the moment for that particular subject.
You've already talked to some degree about the relevance that Williams's life and your play has to what's going on today. But could you perhaps explain, what do you want audiences to come away from the top of Bravery understanding or seeing in a new light?
I spoke a little bit about shame just now. Like the remembering of these certain things seems to bring about with it this like, oh man, we can't ever let it get back to that point. But without that point, there would be no this point. I say that very carefully based on the fact that there's still so many miles to go, because we see practices being repeated that are from that era and before. We see the strife and the stress and the suffering of people who are different from the standard, and I call that the standard whiteness, essentially. Anything that can be considered when we have like a conversation about the people versus the minorities, you got a very hidden meaning in why that's done. Minorities is a catch-all for all the other things that are not white. So it's just like when we have a situation like that in this country, when this country was literally built on those ideas and those concepts and that separation. Of course, it was always relevant, but now it seems as though there's a whole lot of people who are becoming more and more awakened to the fact that we're not there yet. There was a conversation following Barack Obama's his inauguration, his presidency, that we were a post-racial society. People say that people were like so excited to come around touting that terminology because they said it's got to be better, right? It's got to be. But of course, ever since, it's been the same practices that are reared their ugly heads in the same conversations surrounding the same circumstances that people lose their lives because of who and what they are, just for the simple fact of who and what they are, and the conversations surrounding why they lose their lives is always being diminished or swept away or deflected. So we have these new protests and these new demonstrations that are people crying out to be heard once again. And it's like throughout the generations, this has been a pattern. We see protests, we see marches, we see demonstrations, we see peaceful or otherwise resistance to oppression, to discrimination, to racism that have come in cycles pretty much since before this country actually began. And so what I want audiences to see, especially since one of the devices that is used by Dr. T in her directing was that she wanted to have representations, the people who were George Walker, Ada Overton, and Lottie Williams, to be represented as spirits of the theater that assume they're a vessel for those people in the memories of Bert Williams, because it's a denotation that there was something that came before this, that it is an old struggle, it's an old fight by the time Bert Williams arrives. And then there are certain things that I do for the script that harkens or reminds people of the things that are current, the protests that are current right now, the terminologies or the words, the buzzwords of the day now that still would have had relevance back then with the struggles that these people of color were facing, specifically these performers of color were facing. And all of that is to say, how is it that we still, since we've gone from that generation before Bert Williams, we're here representing Bert Williams and his generation right now, but there still is something that will, in this story, that will remind you of what's going on right now, that will remind you of what's going on yesterday. So not only is it a celebration of the brilliance, of the wonderful talent and the bravery of these people that we're showing in the play, it's also a conversation of these were the heroes of the time as far as what they faced and how they faced it, how they faced it bravely, how they faced it creatively, how they faced it just completely just devoid of, not devoid of, but definitely thinking that the consequences that faced them in no way changed their minds about their willingness to confront them and to conquer them. And for their time, they did. But they did it so that the next generation would also have the bravery to do it and to push the conversation a little further. So the main thing, aside from just saying these people were here, they were the creators of this art form, so that they could be an Al Jolson later on, that everybody seems to know about Al Jolson, but don't know about Bert Williams. And so that's a crime, in and of itself. They don't know about Ada Overton, but they know about Fred Astaire. And it's just like that kind of thing. We have to be able to honor the people that came before us. We have to be able to honor the origins of our most celebrated art forms and our most celebrated pastimes, and the way that those performers were able to wield a social justice message. They were able to comment upon the society and push it forward, force it forward through entertainment. But it also is a question of, who are those heroes now? Is it you? Can it be you? Because of the fact that if they were that brave, if they were that willing and able to comment on what was going on around them under threat of death, then how is it that we can't be the same way? How is it that we can't be that powerful and that brave to comment not on even just on our situations, but the situations we see our brothers going through in this country? It was supposed to be from the beginning, as far as what the founders said, their practices were very different from their words. But the founders said it was supposed to be all unity, all of the people, everyone who could have a fair shake here, who could pursue happiness and, work together to make a great country, to make a truly great country. We haven't seen that yet. It was based on a foundation of separation, of discrimination, of hatred, and of violence. And so we still have this conversation now. We still have the question of, are we there? Have we gotten there? Is it time yet? Is something that I want people to walk out of the theater going, so what am I brave enough to do to see to it that these sorts of things never happen again? That everyone will be recognized for their brilliance. Everyone will be recognized for their artistry. Everyone will be recognized for their sacrifices. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, but the struggles that these people fought for, the things that they fought for, were for everyone. It was not just about it. Definitely, majority of it, absolutely. People of color, people of African descent have to be able to self-actualize, have to be able to see the beauty and the royalty of themselves. But it's also for everybody else. They just wanted to make people laugh. They just wanted to dance. They just wanted to express themselves. They just wanted to be able to do it safely. And so that's, why is that still such an unattainable thing today in this country?
Well, this has been a fascinating and enlightening conversation. We are going to include a link to more information about Jeremy's play, The Top of Bravery, as well as other material related to Bert Williams' life and career. Jeremy, thank you so much.
Absolutely, man. Thank you.
If you'd like to continue today's conversation, please visit howlround.com and follow HowlRound and @TheaterHistory on Twitter. A big thank you to the staff at HowlRound who make this show possible. Our theme music is The Black Crook Gallop, which comes to us courtesy of the New York Public Library Libretto Project and Adam Roberts. Thanks as well to Tip Kress, who designed our logo. And finally, thank you for listening.